All right, everyone. So today we're going to pivot from what behavior is to how behaviors are addressed at a larger level. And that's going to be through looking at MTSS, which stands for Multi-Tiered Systems of Support. The multi-tiered systems of support, or MTSS, is a big picture framework that schools use to make sure every student gets what they need academically, behaviorally, socially, emotionally. MTSS is meant to help us intervene early, match support to student needs, and make data-based decisions. So let's go with some basics first. What is MTSS? The multi-tiered systems of support, it's not a specific program or curriculum, it's a framework, and it's designed to help schools integrate supports across all different areas. So that academic, behavior, social, emotional learning, all of those areas should be integrating the supports for students. And this is going to, again, include everything from math instruction to behavior plans to check-ins with the school counselor. One of the biggest strengths of MTSS is that it's meant to be proactive and it is data driven. So instead of waiting until a student is in crisis, we're constantly collecting information within this system. This means we're always looking at who needs support and adjusting what to do before the problem escalates. MTSS is not about labels or about figuring out who's eligible for special education. MTSS is about need because it concerns itself with all students, not just a specific group of students. We are looking at what each student needs to succeed and building support around that. On the right here, you'll see a triangle with three tiers. This is how MTSS is typically depicted. This is where the tiers in multi-tiered support comes from. Starting at the base here of the triangle is tier one, and tier one applies to everyone. The supports available at tier one is what every single student is supposed to get and have access to no matter what. What are these supports? In the MTSS world, the supports are the universal supports down here are supposed to be access to high quality evidence-based instruction, clear expectations, positive reinforcement, social emotional learning. All of these are supposed to be provided to all students in tier one. The supports available in the tier one are sufficient generally for the majority of the population, as in 80 to 90% of all students in any kind of given school succeed given the tier one supports. If the supports in tier one are strong, fewer students are going to need extra help later on. That's why classroom routines, behavior expectations, positive relationships matter so much. That's all part of tier one. Now let's look at tier two. And this is in the yellow here. Tier two is for students who need a little extra. Tier two services usually apply to about 10 to 15% of any school's population. Students getting tier two supports are those who we are concerned about for whatever reason it may be. And the supports that are available at tier one, they're just not enough to get this student to, let's say it's academic. So the supports at tier one are not enough to get the student to academically succeed. If it was socially, the supports at tier one are not enough to help the student socially succeed. Whatever the reason may be, at tier one, those supports are just not enough for the student, meaning that they could be at risk for failure. And that failure could be in any of the spaces that we support. So academic, behavioral, social, any of the rest that we are supporting within our systems here. Tier two supports might include small group instruction, check-in, check-out systems, social skills groups, behavior contracts. Again, this is a step above tier one, but it doesn't mean that like we're escalating to the most kind of high level of support we can give because that student might not need that. What makes tier two different is that it's more focused and consistent. Again, it's not about replacing tier one, it's about building on top of it. How students get to tier two is often driven by data. We're looking for students who are not responding to tier one alone and providing extra help early before things escalate. Now, tier three at the top of our triangle here, this is where we zoom way in. This is for the few students who need highly individualized supports. And this is going to apply to about 1 to 5% of the student population. Students who require this much level of need are not a high population within a whole school generally. The types of supports up top in tier one could look like a daily behavior plan, one-on-one coaching, or para or provider, full wraparound services, which includes occupational therapy or OT, physical therapy, PT, speech language from the SLP, speech language pathologist. I've mentioned special ed and education in general is full of acronyms. I'm trying my best to say them all. More often than not, students receiving tier three supports also qualify for special education services, though not always. Tier three isn't only for students with disabilities, but there's often overlap because the level of support is similar. It's highly targeted, team-based, and responsive to complex needs. The key at tier three is going to be individualization, which is a really big part of special education. It's an individualized process as well. We're tailoring supports to the students' unique needs and tracking progress really closely. It is labor intensive, but for some students, it's also absolutely necessary. Now let's talk about one of the most important parts of MTSS, and that is database decision making. You might have noticed a pattern here as if you've been watching the videos in sequential order for our class. Data-based decision making, collecting data, those two things seem to be coming up quite a bit in relation to anything to do with behavior. That behavior and data seem to be quite hand in hand in the world of education. So if you hadn't picked up on that pattern just yet, know that that seems to be quite the case. Data in MTSS helps keep the system responsive and not rigid. What kind of data are we talking about? Well, that could include behavior logs, office discipline referrals, progress monitoring tools like daily point sheets or behavior rating scales. It might even be something really simple like teacher notes or check in, check out forms, or even the like tally marks that you're making or notes that you're jotting down. That is all a form of data that is usable in the world of MTSS. And a very important note here is that we don't collect data just to collect it. Who has time to just collect data for fun? Um, we use data to figure out, is what we're doing working? Does the student need more support? Do they need less support? Do they need a different kind of support? So let's say a student is working on raising their hand instead of calling out common behavior. We can track how often they're using that replacement behavior, raising their hand, and look for patterns. If the data shows an improvement, awesome. We can start to fade away some of the additional supports we have. And if the data does not show improvement, then we need to rethink the strategy. That's what data does for us. It isn't just numbers. It's like our flashlight, essentially. It helps us see what's really going on, and it helps us make smart decisions across all tiers. We're going to do a quick pause and check. So, which of the following is an example of data a teacher might use to adjust supports in MTSS? If you chose B, behavior logs, you were correct. Cultural responsiveness and equity. Now, these two areas here, this is where MTSS really has the potential to either help or hurt, and it's depending on how it's used. If we're not paying attention to bias, whether in how we refer students for a different tier of support, how we interpret behaviors, and even which students get access to interventions, MTSS can actually replicate disparities, as in make disparities, known disparities in student and populations worse instead of doing what we're hoping for it to do, and it's close them and make them better. And unfortunately, this isn't a new story. Students of color, especially Black and Brown boys, they are referred to tier two and tier three supports more often. Or also, they are being suspended and removed from classes at much higher rates than other populations and groups of students. And that's not an MTSS problem. That's a systems and a bias problem. MTSS can't do anything to help the situation, though, unless it makes equity a central focus. So that means that we are going to be using culturally responsive practices, and we are going to be checking that our assessments and the messages we send to our students and to families and the materials that we have, that those are culturally appropriate and inclusive because they are meant to be addressing all learners and ensuring that every student, regardless of background, has equitable access to your level of education that you're providing, to the level of services you're providing, and to the supports that are available to all students. It also means we should be tracking who's being referred for tier 2 and tier 3 supports. We need to be tracking who's being suspended, who's in tier 3 in general, looking at different categories of students who are in tier 3 and seeing if there are any patterns, anything that might be unintentionally creating barriers that we may not have noticed before. Not everything happened on our watch. Sometimes we also inherit problems or things nobody had thought about it before. But looking at it from a data-based side of things, you can start to pull numbers of different groups of students within any population and start to see if there are any patterns where suddenly you're noticing more of one type of gender, one type of race of student, and that might not make quite as much sense when you really think about why that might be. MTSS has so much potential. It sincerely does. But again, it's only going to help those bigger systematic issues that we have in the world or in schools and society if we are also working intentionally to build equity into all of our practices within MTSS, which really means into all of the practices within education and that school building that we're in. So collaboration and teaming. One of the best things about MTSS is that you don't have to do it alone. MTSS is built on a collaborative problem-solving team model. And I want to emphasize the word team. That means that general education teachers, special education teachers, the school psych, the counselor, the cafeteria workers, the hall monitor, the bus coordinator, everyone should be playing some sort of role in working together to figure out what students need and how to help. If those roles mean they're interacting with the student and they know the student. This is especially important when we're talking about students with disabilities or students who we might suspect as having a disability. This means that working with all other adults who support that student is also key. More or too often, we see teachers working in silos. They are in their classroom, their domain of the four walls, those are their students, and kind of get into this person on a lonely island. But that's how you have to operate, and that's how it makes sense to you. But that's also not the reality when right outside your door, there's a bunch of other teachers who are part of this school system with you and might also have interactions with that student and can really help support that student further by working with you and you working with them. And so we have to get ourselves out of that silo for a bit. If we're really trying to implement MTSS with fidelity, it means that all educators are looking at all kids, and we have to do that together. So just some information here on how MTSS goes along for students with disabilities, meaning students who receive special ed services. Students with disabilities are and can receive tier 1 and tier 2 supports. Those, again, should be supports, or tier 1 supports should be universally available to everybody. We don't want to fall into the either or trap, and that's like thinking once a student qualifies for service or for special education services, they're only getting what's in their special education IEP or individualized education plan, and nothing else. That's just not how it works. MTSS is a layered system, not a siloed one, right? Like not a single system. So if the student receives special education services and also benefits from a school-wide point system to get a prize for getting really good grades, right? Or if they're participating in the tier 2 social group, that's great. That means that this student is able to get support from multiple angles, from their special ed services specifically, but also from the school-wide plans or supports for behavior, for student growth. A strong MTSS system can also help prevent over referral to special education. And that's by catching students earlier and giving them access to targeted support, targeted help before we jump into that process of evaluation because the gap and the need is so large. So for our students with disabilities, MTSS can make sure or can really help make sure that they're not excluded from supports that could benefit them.